Good evening. I'm Priscilla Beaton of the Cape Bird Club. Welcome to our joint Cape Bird Club and Tiger Bird Club meeting. It's a week later than our usual CBC meeting, and Tiger Bird kindly said that we could share this third Thursday to allow Mike a longer post-flock preparation time. Mike Buckham is no stranger to any of us. He's a prolific bird photographer and has his own website called Buckham Birding. He's also a prolific writer, having written many articles for African bird life, and a presenter, both for our Cape Bird Club evening talks and for BirdLife South Africa. In fact, on the 1st of March, he is co-presenting with Dave Winter for a Tuesday evening conservation conversations evening. They will be talking about the best birding spots of Cape Town, so don't forget to watch. That's Tuesday week. He's also, with Dave Winter, run numerous Better Birding courses or webinars that can be found on the Better Birding YouTube channel. He is, as many of us know, also a quizmaster extraordinaire. You may have read his article on the family road trip to Namibia last July in the January-February edition of African Bird Life. But this evening's presentation will give us so much more than any 5 printed pages ever can. Mike, in his own words, says, "It's my favorite thing to do at the club, to talk about cool birds and show some of my photos." And we know that his talks are always amazing and exciting. Mike is a great storyteller. Over to you, Mike.
Thank you very much, Priscilla. I'm hoping that everyone can hear me. And I'd like to just say a big welcome to all the Cape Bird Club members, as well as Tiger Bird Club, who's joining us this evening. It's great to have a nice bunch of people attending, because these Zoom calls towards the end of last year got quite thin on the ground in terms of participants joining these calls. I think we're all sick of sitting in an office and watching these things. I'm itching to get back into a live environment and do some live presenting, but we agreed to combine ours and the Tiger Birds meeting, and I think it's just easier to do it this way. So I hope you all get something out of it online. And yeah, it's very nice to present on something that is, for me, one of the best countries in the world to travel from, not just a birding point of view, but from a wildlife and a scenery perspective. And this photo, as my cover slide, is just a very good example of that. Beautiful vegetation, these amazing granite Inselbergs, these wide open grassy plains, and just dotted with some wonderful acacia trees, and hidden behind a lot of these rocks and trees are some amazing birds, and I hope to take you on a bit of a journey of the trip that we did. So just to get started, maybe just to show you what itinerary we chose. And as you saw, this was June, July last year, and Namibia is an amazing place to travel to during winter. Temperatures are great, the skies are blue, you don't get too hot, and the nights are a little bit cooler, but it's an incredible place to take bird photographs and wildlife photographs without sweating too much. The only downside is you miss out on a lot of the migrant birds, but from an endemic perspective, a bird endemic perspective, there's very, very little that you miss out in winter, and sometimes those birds are actually easier to find during the winter periods. So what you'll notice in the red block on the map on the left-hand side is that we chopped off quite a large amount of Namibia in terms of our trip. We had a 2-week school holiday, and we had to squish it all into that. We traveled with some friends, and I'll get to that in a sec, but we tried to extend the trip up to the Kunene. And if you look in this map over here, the Kunene birding is up here in the top left-hand corner. To travel across from sort of Taranga across to here and then back down into Etosha, just is, it's probably 3 or 4 days of traveling. From sort of this Taranga area to here, it's about 800 kilometers, and that's a full day's driving on the Namibian roads in the north. So we chose to limit ourselves a little bit, and what you'll also notice is we didn't We didn't do any of the birding down here in the Sossusvlei area, and we actually didn't get to Swakopmund and Windhoek and Walvis Bay. And people will criticize that itinerary, but we've done the south on previous trips. And I really wanted to get into this this sort of panhandle area of Etosha, goodness gracious, Okavango. And so what we did is we extended our journey up into a place called Ngepi Camp, and we'll go into more detail there. So that was our itinerary, and just to go through each of the places we stayed, we had a stopover at Roy's Rest Camp, and I'll talk about each one, so I won't spend too long now. We then went to Ngepi Camp, which is on the Kavango River, which then flows into the Okavango swamps. We then went to Teranga Safari Lodge, and the reasons for that will become apparent shortly. We then were on the eastern side of Etosha at Namatoni Camp, where the fort is. We traveled across to the popular Okakuyo Camp, which is where you have that amazing waterhole that's floodlit at night. We traveled the road through Etosha to get to the Western Gate, the Golden Gate, to go out to Hobotiri Lodge, which is very well known from back in the day. The Brain family started Hobotiri Lodge. Unfortunately, they've moved away from there and it's been taken over by new owners. It's still amazing, but the Brains were real naturalists, and it was a slightly different experience without them there. And then we came down into the Irongo area and we visited a place called Iaba. Irongo Wilderness Lodge is no longer Irongo Wilderness Lodge. It's been taken over also by new owners. And we were recommended Iaba, and we'll talk about that in a second. It was really fantastic. And then we finished off at a crummy motel in Windhoek, and that has its own story. So our traveling group, which was the Buckham family, which is those that don't know us, it's myself and Jean. So Jean is this lady over here with the sunglasses on, and then my 4 children. That's my son Thomas, Adam, Jack, and Emma. And then we traveled with some very good friends of ours, the Rippins, Alistair, Kirst, Nick, and Alec. So it complicates things by traveling with another family, but it also makes it a whole lot more fun. And even though they're not birders, we visited so many amazing places and saw so many different things that they were equally as happy as the birders were. So we, as the title of my presentation suggests, we dodged COVID. We had a very torrid time with COVID, which all ended up being actually fine. This is the testing center, the Hamadi testing center in Claremont, and on the Wednesday before we left on the Friday, we decided to do our tests there. Jean was very concerned because there was a bit of a pop-up COVID testing station. She said, we're not going to get reliable COVID tests. I said, nonsense. These places are verified and vetted by all the important people that's supposed to vet these things, and we can get our tests done at Hamadi. So we went and had our 6 COVID tests. The Rippins went elsewhere and they got their 4 negative tests from another lab. I think they went to Discovery. And we, on the Thursday morning, got 6 negative results, and we were now ready to go. We actually held back on paying for a lot of accommodation because we weren't sure we were going to get there. And then what we decided to do was pay all the accommodation, and that worked out fine. And we said to Jean's mom on the Thursday, let's do our family trustee meeting at our house. We're all negative, so why don't you come along and join us? To cut a very long story short, we flew out on the Friday. We traveled on the Friday, had lunch at a place in Ochiwarongo, and Tommy, my oldest son, had a burger and a Coke. And he said to me, Dad, does Coke taste different in Windhoek or in Namibia? And I said to him, well, Tommy, one of the things you know about Coke is that it's a universal taste. It tastes the same everywhere. He said, my Coke doesn't taste like anything. It tastes pretty much like metal. So Jean then went into panic station. She said, well, Tommy's definitely got COVID. And I said, just relax. We got 6 negative tests. You can't possibly have COVID. And that was on the Friday. And then on the Monday, when we were at Ngepi, we got a phone call from Jean's mom, and she had tested positive back in Cape Town. And then we definitely were very much aware that Tommy and probably Jean, while we were there, were COVID positive. And that changed our trip in quite a large number of practical ways. We had to separate from the Rippins for quite a while. We had to be very cautious in Namibia, but we stayed as a unit of 6 and we traveled together. And we obviously had moments where we were worried that we wouldn't get back into South Africa and we'd test positive coming back. But to once again cut a very long story short, we ended up having 6 negative tests in Windhoek and coming back to Cape Town absolutely fine. The Rippins never got COVID. Yeah, it was nervous moments because Windhoek also went into lockdown as we arrived, and we had to get through multiple roadblocks. So it was quite a stressful time, and obviously Jean dealing with the stress of her mom having COVID was another factor. Anyway, so I don't want to spend too much longer talking about COVID, and now my screen seems to have, I don't know what's happened to my presentation. Sorry, I can't see my presentation on this side. This has never happened before. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to close my presentation and start again. Roy's Camp slide with the rosy-faced lovebirds. Can everybody see that? Okay, all good. Okay, yes, let's resume. I suspect you heard the end of the COVID story, and that's all that we needed to say. And so anyway, our first night we landed in Windhoek, and it's a relatively long drive to get to Roy's Camp. Roy's Camp is a very well-known stopover point up to sort of the Caprivi. And what we did is we stopped there and spent a night, and the reason for stopping at Roy's Camp is not only because it's a nice stopover point, but it's very well known for black-faced babblers, which is a real special bird from northern Namibia. And I convinced everybody that we should stop there for black-faced babblers. And that comes with the story as well, because about 15 years ago, I traveled to Roy's Camp with my father. And as we arrived, I said to one of the owners, I said, I'm only here really to see a black-faced babbler. And they said, well, we'll guarantee you a black-faced babbler. And we left the next day at about lunchtime, and we still hadn't seen one. But while we were having a nice drink in the evening, they feed the lesser galaga, which is a nachapi or a bush baby. And it's pretty cute, not great photographs with all the metal and the pear, but it is a very special place. And the next morning we were up early, and Adam and I trawled the grounds, and it wasn't long before we could hear the babblers, and we had really good views. Not the greatest photographic opportunities, but if you want to see black-faced babblers, either Roy's Camp or go to, there's a Makuti Lodge on the eastern side of Namatoni, which is also very good for them because they are very, very difficult to find. So anyway, it was on to Ngepi Camp, which was our next stopover, and that was where we were going to spend 3 nights. We wanted to stop over in a place and really chill out a little bit. So you can see on this map, it's a decent length drive, and everything in Namibia is very far. So the roads are great, but the distances are as great. So when one travels from one place to another, it all looks quite easy, but it's the distances are very long. So we traveled into the mouth of the sort of Caprivi strip. You can see in this map here, there's this little narrow channel, and the Kavango River travels down into the Panhandle, which is here at Chikawi, and it travels out of Namibia into Botswana, and that's the start of the Okavango Delta. And Ngepi Camp is pretty much the same habitat as you'd expect in the Panhandle, so some amazing birds that you get up north there. This was a little road stop, and we did a lot of those along the way. There are these beautiful trees. This is on the stretch between Rundu and Devundu. Lots of kilometers of these woodlands, and it's very well known for birds like Sousa shrike and sharp-tailed starling and rufous-bellied tit. Those 3 birds were potential lifers for me on this trip, and I can report with a great degree of disappointment that despite looking very hard for all 3 of those species, we came away empty-handed. And it was the only mild disappointment. I'm not too fussed about missing things like that because it just means I have to go back. The one real highlight, which was taken, this photo was taken pretty close to where this tree was, is this young Ayers' hawk eagle, and it's a very attractive one as well. So nice to see that. Ngepi Camp is on the banks of the Kavango River, and it's you can see in this section over here, the river winds, goes over the Papa Falls over here, Papa Game Park, and then Ngepi Camp is down here somewhere, and you have these wonderful islands and lots of beautiful scenery. And Ngepi Camp has these river bungalows that really have nothing stopping you from walking off the bungalow into the Kavango River, where there are plenty of hippos and crocodiles. So if you do visit Ngepi Camp, it's absolutely amazing. But don't take 3-year-old children there because you might lose them to the wildlife. There was nothing better than sitting in our room. I think it's a very liberal description. but sitting on our veranda or lying in bed at 5 o'clock in the morning and hearing the lions roaring and the hippos grunting and the elephants trumpeting. It's a very, very special place, and it gives you access to a lot of those sort of papyrus type birds rather than the dry stuff in Namibia. So there's nothing better than a gin and tonic on the river. And Nick was a keen fisherman. I don't think he caught anything, but not due to lack of trying. Emma keeping in company, and obviously sundowners on the boat cruises is just a wonderful way to spend a winter's day in Namibia. So some of the special birds, and I'll spin through these relatively quickly. Hartlobes, babblers are literally everywhere. They are extremely noisy, and they're throughout the camp and throughout that whole area. We saw quite a few African barred owlets. You hear them calling early in the morning, and they really are pretty birds, easily found by watching for the other birds that tend to mob them. So fork-tailed drongos and the tits and the shrikes get very upset with these barred owlets hanging around. Bradfield's hornbill is a real special of that area. So it's not easy to find Bradfield's hornbill in Namibia. You see them in the Caprivi Strip and in the Waterberg. They're quite scarce on the Waterberg Plateau, but they're quite common in the areas around Ngepi Camp. And what Adam and I would do is we would walk from the camp, and you can easily walk out onto the floodplain and just bird the woodland that surrounds the river, which is very pleasant. Beautiful yellow-billed oxpeckers in mixed flocks with red-billed oxpeckers, but we don't see yellow-billed as often as we see red-billed, so wanted to highlight that photo. And then lots of Meave starlings. And the problem in that area is that there are at least 5 glossy blue starlings, so it's Burchell's, Meaves, Cape glossy, greater blue-eared, and sharp-tailed starling. So you see large flocks of these glossy blue starlings, sometimes mixed flocks, often greater blue-eareds mixed with the Meaves and the Burchells. And sharp-tailed starling is a tricky one to pick out. And so we would stop at flocks of starlings, and we'd scan them, and by the 5th or 6th flock of starlings that we'd stop at, I was getting lots of skew glances from the rest of the family. So we tended to stop looking at starlings for a while, and it might have been a reason why we missed them in the end. So just a few other birds. Sorry, I made some changes to the slides and they seem to have not come through, but no matter, this is a red-billed spurfowl, which is a common Namibian bird. Lovely to see them in the late afternoon light, and little bee eaters are pretty much everywhere on the riverside papyrus and reeds. Apologies, I had a nice slide of a tinkling testicular, but it seems to have disappeared. And then what we did is we traveled by car just a few kilometers up the road to a place called the Popper Falls Game Park, and we booked a cruise on the river. And that's a very recommended thing to do. The guides generally know where birds like white-backed night heron are, and when the conditions are right, you get all the rock pratincoles. I seem to mess up my timing with rock pratincoles, still a bird I need, but if you really want to see a rock pratincole, you go there in July, late July, August, September, when the water levels have dropped and the rocks are exposed. So this is the actual Popper Falls. So it's a cascading type of waterfall. It's not a dramatic waterfall like Vic Falls. So lots of change in sort of water level, and the water rushes over these wonderful rocks. And we had a really nice trip on the boat, white-backed night herons. We saw 2 pairs. The guides know where they are, which is very helpful. And then this really cool spot-necked otter, which is another animal that we don't see very often. And then lots of rufous-bellied herons on the river. So that was a really fun evening, and it was about 2 hours later that we found out that Jean's mom had COVID. So the mood changed from a very happy camping trip, well, a very happy group of people, to a slightly more concerned group of people, knowing what we were sort of dealing with now. So after we spent our time in Ngepi, we spent our 3 nights there, and Adam and I actually took a trip up to an area where Susa Shrike is known from, and we traipsed around in some sort of degraded woodland for many hours looking for Susas, as well as rufous-bellied tit, and we didn't find them. I found out subsequently that there's a guide at Mahangu. There's a Mahangu Game Lodge, which is a few kilometers south of Ngepi. If you go to Mahangu Game Lodge and ask for a gent there, I can't remember his name, but if you contact me, I can tell you what his name is. And he knows where those 3 species are: rufous-bellied tit, Susa Shrike, and sharp-tailed starling. So I only found that out once we'd left, which was a pity. But I know two separate groups who went after we did and got them quite easily. So it's good to know. But we then traveled to Teranga. Teranga Safari Lodge is also on the Kabanga River and is west of Rundu. If Rundu sounds appealing, it's definitely not. It's really not a very nice place. And the thought of going for a COVID test in Rundu and ending up in quarantine there wasn't something that we were hoping to do. So we stayed away from testing in Rundu. But Teranga Safari Lodge is a wonderful place where we could get a little bit away from people. And if you look at the map, it's about a 250 kilometer drive. You can see Rundu is about 40 kilometers east of Teranga. And in this overhead Google view, you can see Teranga is this property, this sort of triangular property. It's got some really nice woodland, but it's pretty much surrounded by subsistence farmland. And so the birding is only really good in this little triangle. And if you do a boat trip, the boat trip is pretty good, but not as good as Ngepi, but you can see the grounds are absolutely beautiful. And if you can see this little spot over here, this woodland surrounding this open bare patch, that is the reason we were there. And I think many birders will know that Stefan, the guy at Teranga Lodge, found a Ross's Chiraco there about 2 years ago. I think it was October 2020 or October 2019. And many birders made the immediate trip up there to twitch it. And I decided to wait a little bit longer. And just before we left, we contacted Stefan and said to him, is the Ross's Chiraco still around? And he said, yes, it's been seen at the waterhole. So when we arrived, he was doing his wonderful introduction on this lovely deck. And he was telling us about the toilet systems and the electricity and when meals were served and how you can get tea and coffee in your room. And all I wanted to know was how to find the Ross's Chiraco. So he told us, this is just another view from the deck. Jeannie used her time there to do some planking. This is the view, sunset on the river from a cruise, and this was us sitting on the little boat. But what he said to us is, he said, at 4:30, you must go and sit at the waterhole. And you can see Adam and I diligently listened to his instructions. But what we didn't realize is that the time on our watches had reset. I've got a GPS-enabled watch, and it had now recognized that we were in Angola. And it switched my watch to Angolan time. So 4:30 Namibian time was actually 5:30 Angolan time. So when when Adam and I cruised over there at 4:30, it was actually 5:30. And I said to Adam, it's strange that he's given us such a short time window, because it seems to be getting dark a lot quicker than I had expected. But luckily for us, Adam heard a bird squawking in the tree, and he looked up and he said, Dad, there is the bird. And it's just very satisfying to actually see the bird that we were looking for. This was the first shot I took of it, not a particularly good one. Sorry, excuse the dogs barking outside. It will hopefully not be for too long. But yeah, it's just a stunning bird. I've seen them in Uganda, but it's lovely to see them in the sub-region. They've got this bright yellow facial shield and bare eye patch, and this crazy red sort of vertical crest on top of their heads. And we sat at that waterhole just waiting for it to gain enough courage to come down and drink from the waterhole. So this was a very satisfying moment. You can see it's a very grainy photo, but it was wonderful to see such a special bird. And when you look at the distribution of Ross's Chiraco, even though sort of Angola and Zambia are just north of that Kabanga River, it's actually a very scarce bird in Angola and Zambia. So one wonders if this is a relic population. You wonder if there's another bird and it's a pair, but it really is an unusual thing to see in northern Namibia. So anyway, we then struck out one morning, Adam and I, because the Rundu radio mast, for those that are regular birders and know these spots, there's a radio tower about 20 kilometers south of Rundu, and it's well known and famous for rufous-bellied tit. I've been there once before with my father about 15 years ago, and I remember it being pretty disappointing, but I was 15 years on, much better birder than I was back then. Also had young ears and eyes of Adam with me, so it was going to be a real star attraction. We were going to find this rufous-bellied tit in no time. I dialed myself into the call. So anyway, we arrived at the mast park there and then started traipsing through the woodland. And I think in 2 hours, we walked the place flat. We walked up and down, and even it was midwinter, it was pretty hot. And the only bird we saw in 2 hours at the Rundu radio mast was the swallowtail bee-eater, which by all accounts is a beautiful bird and very attractive. But it was not really what we were hoping to find at the Rundu radio tower. So for those that do go there, it's well documented in the books. I have friends who've been there and have had success with rufous-bellied tit, but it certainly is not as easy as you would always expect. So that was Teranga, and in my books, seeing the Ross's Tureka was hugely successful. It's a wonderful lodge. Stefan, who runs the place, is a wonderful guy, and the food was excellent. The boat cruises were amazing, and the 2 nights we spent there were very well worth it. Anyway, the next stop on our itinerary was into the world-famous Etosha National Park, and I'd been a little bit ambivalent about going into Etosha. I wondered to myself, are there many amazing birds that we can see in Etosha that I've not seen before? But going with the family and with friends of ours and seeing big game in a big park like that was absolutely wonderful. The conditions were great. They'd had a lot of rain the season before, so there was quite a lot of water around. The bird life was incredible. Not too many really special species. I mean, this photograph shows a red-necked falcon, which in my book is an incredibly special bird. But you see sort of the game reserve type birds, the rollers and the goshawks and you know, the sandgrass and those types of birds, but not a lot of the Namibian endemics. But still, it's so worthwhile, and particularly for mammals. And just a note on the mammals: we always have a competition to see who can guess the number of bird species and the number of mammal species that we get on a trip. We even include reptiles as well, and we always do it when we leave the airport in our rental car, and everyone has a guess, and there's a big prize at the end. And our bird species count is, you know, I think we guessed around 300, and we ended up with about 295. That was kind of the average guess. I'm always asked to guess first because I generally have the best idea. With mammals, I had absolutely no idea, but I still was asked to guess first. So I guessed 36 mammals. That was my guess for a 2-week trip in Namibia. We hit 36 mammals, I think, before we even went into Etosha. And we ended up with 65 mammal species on a trip to Namibia. And we were now looking for some of the smaller things, but it was absolutely amazing how many mammals we did see while we were in Namibia. So anyway, our drive down to Namatoni was absolutely wonderful. We traversed this area. This is the Rippons relied on a physical map. And what you'll notice is the road from Nkuru actually crosses over here before it goes straight. Whereas my Google Maps told me to go here, and then we would have this very straight road. One would have wondered why the road was so straight. I didn't really question it, but I maybe should have. So we ended up over here, and then there actually was no road, so we had to backtrack, whilst the Rippons ended up being well ahead of us. But this road across here from Tsinsibis across to sort of Namatoni, this 85 kilometers was quite an unnerving road, and we didn't see a single car. We saw an incredibly large black mamba, but it was very strange to travel these roads, knowing that if you break down, the likelihood of another car passing by is very slim. But be that as it may, we ended up where we needed to go, and we had a wonderful picnic on the side of the roads, which is something we do as a family, which is a real tradition. Anyway, we arrived at Namatoni, and we were all anxious to get out for a late afternoon game drive. And in the space of 15 minutes, we saw all 3 of the sandgrass species that you'd expect to see in Etosha. So we first saw double-banded sandgrass, which is relatively common. The Makwa sandgrass is actually very common, particularly at the drinking holes. And then we even saw a pair of birchall sandgrass, which is a real special one in Etosha. And at certain water holes, you get, they're quite reliable for birchalls. And the one water hole that we know of, it's about 5 kilometers west of Namatoni. And it's very well known for birchall sandgrass. So you need a little bit of that gem to make sure that you get them, but we were pretty lucky. We saw all 3 species quite easily. So there's some classic game reserve birds, lilac-breasted roller. They're pretty ubiquitous. You see them everywhere, and you might as well take a photograph of one. And then this gay-bar goshawk is actually well known at that particular waterhole I was referring to, the one with the birchall sandgrass. It's a bird that frequents that waterhole. It obviously enjoys eating doves and sandgrass. And we were very lucky to find it perched one early morning and get a nice photo of it. They're not such easy birds to photograph. And then on our way to Okakuyo, it's about 130 kilometers from Namatoni to Okakuyo. It's a wonderful game drive. You drive early in the morning with the sun behind you, and game viewing is incredible, particularly in those open plains with a lot of grass. But a stop at Halali is very worthwhile, and for one specific reason, which is it's a very reliable spot for violet woodhoopoe. So there's a little park there called Jack Park, and the reason I took that photograph is my son's name is Jack, so I took it for him. But it's a good reference point because when you have your lunch at Halali or your late breakfast, it's in these trees that you see the violet woodhoopoes. They're pretty easy to find. They're very noisy, and they move around in a big sort of jumbling group. And the taxonomy of violet woodhoopoes is a real problem. Omaruru is supposed to be the place where they occur, but you'll find birds with very bottle green heads, and you can even see this one has got a little bit of green on its crown. So we confidently tick this one as violet woodhoopoe. You can see a lot of violet on its back and its wings, and we're comfortable that those are violet woodhoopoes, but there is a hybrid zone sort of a little bit further east, and so Halali is a good place to get your life of violet woodhoopoe if you don't have it yet. And then another special in the camp is bare-cheeked babbler. Bare-cheeked babbler is a really special bird of northern Namibia. We ended up seeing a lot of them, particularly in the northwest. At Habatia, they were all over the place, but it's a really attractive babbler. And actually on our trip to Namibia, this particular time, we saw all 5 species of babblers. So we had heartlobes at Ngepi, we had southern pied in Etosha, we had black-faced at Roy's camp, and then we had Aramarked also at Taranga, and then we had bare-cheeked in Etosha and at Habatia. So really nice to get the full suite of babblers. And unusually, we didn't really get a photograph of Aramarked, which is the one you see most commonly elsewhere. And then we got to sort of the Okakuyo camp, and this was, I know it's not a very special bird, and it's not a particularly colorful bird, but for me, it was amazing to get such nice photos of stark's lark. So they're not that common in Etosha that I'm aware of. They're more common sort of Sossusvlei and in a lot of the grassy areas around Spitzkop. But we found quite a few stark's larks mixing with pink-billed larks. And I just always wanted to get this exact photo of a stark's lark really get low down to it. And we found a nice area we could get low down on the ground and take a photograph of it. And it's really a photo that encapsulates sort of that central area of Etosha where you get these gravel plains and all these LBJs. And I've got a specific slide with some of the larks. So Okakuyo is very well known for this waterhole. You can literally spend an entire day there. We had some amazing animals. The one evening we were braaiing and we heard that there were rhinos. So we rushed down and there were 15 black rhinos and 2 white rhino. We also had a brown hyena. We had lion, lots of elephant, and all the plains game comes down to drink. And then you have to be there at sunset because the double-banded sandgrass come into the waterhole as they turn the floodlights on. And they literally come in their hundreds. They've got such an amazing call, and it's really a very special place to sit and have your cold beer and enjoy a wonderful camp. So there's a tower which the kids love climbing, and we also allowed them to swim in the pool, which in between game drives. So these are some of the, sorry, I did change these slides. They're a bit awkward, but I lost my presentation, so let's just deal with it. Rufous-eared warbler is not a common bird in Etosha, but you get a specific race there, so it was a bird I really wanted to see and photograph. Chat flycatchers are quite common. Northern black corehorns are extremely common and really nice to get some decent photos. And then we had this very obliging tawny eagle. So those are just some of the photos of the birds. And as you can see, aside from the rufous-eared warbler, generally large sort of game reserve type birds, which are nice to see in Etosha. I mean, then the courses are fantastic. The 2 species that you get there are commonly double-banded courser. You literally see them everywhere. You get great photographic opportunities. And then Birchall's courser is a real special and not a bird I'd seen before in Etosha. but we came across quite a few groups, and this particular one was a very early morning as we were leaving Okakuyo, and we bumped into a group of about 15 of them. You do get Tebing's Corsa in Etosha as well. We didn't see them in Etosha, we saw them at Nkepi, but Corsas are such popular birds, and really nice to see Birchall's Corsa. So here's my slide of some of the larks. This is the Bradfield's subspecies of Subota with a very heavy bill. This is spike-heeled. Here's a rufous-naped lark, Stark's lark, and then pink-billed lark. And in fact, all 5 of these birds were pretty much seen on one particular morning game drive. So really good for larks. Pink-billed lark, there's a little spot near the airfield just north of Okakuyo. It's a really good place to get them, and that's where we also saw the Stark's lark. And then I just thought I spoke about the mammals, and I just thought I'd throw in a few mammal slides. We enjoyed seeing the mammals, and the kids love them, and the Rippons are big mammal fans. So you see a lot of Birchall zebra, and actually at Hobbit you see Hartman's mountain zebra. Lots of mongooses. We saw the slender mongoose, and we saw dwarf mongoose, banded mongoose, plenty of other species. The surrogate backpack jackals, always popular. This was probably our, I don't know if it was our mammal highlight. It was pretty close to our mammal highlight. Aardwolf is not an animal you see that easily. And we went for a game drive from Okakuyo, and Adam spotted what he thought was a spotted hyena. So we stopped the car, and at a great distance, we could see this Aardwolf, which we got extremely excited about, and then it disappeared. And we thought we'd lost it, and then 5 minutes later, it came straight towards the car and ended up sort of looking for termites right next to the road. So they're nocturnal animals, and you don't expect to see them in the day like this. But this is definitely one of my highlight photographs, just to see an Aardwolf in such wonderful light and in such close proximity. And then obviously lots of rhino. It's probably one of the world's strongholds of black rhino. We saw plenty of black rhino and a few white rhino as well. And then obviously the iconic antelope of Namibia, I guess, is these gemsbok or oryx. And you see plenty of them, and they're such handsome animals. We saw quite a few lion, and this large male lion was at a waterhole. I did take photographs of these lion, but I was concentrating more on the sandgrass. And this particular waterhole had huge numbers of Namakwa sandgrass and quite large numbers of Birchall sandgrass as well. So it's quite remarkable that I turned my camera away from them and took a photograph of this lion, but he was very photogenic. It was quite interesting. There was a mating pair of lions on the other side of the car. And this guy was looking over him, I suspect, with a small degree of jealousy as he watched his comrades with a female. And then leopard is not an animal you see very commonly in Etosha at all. And we were doing the Dik drive near Namatoni, which I guess is good habitat for leopard. It's a little bit more bushy. My son Tommy suddenly shouted out, he couldn't actually get the words out, but he started banging on the sort of dashboard of the car. I screeched to a halt, and he suddenly screamed out leopard, and I thought he was seeing things. But this leopard, very handsome leopard, was sitting in some grass just next to the road, and it was wonderful to take some pictures. Anyway, so we left Etosha, and we headed west. And if you can do it, it's a very long drive. It's about 100 and I think it's more. I think it's almost 200 k's from Okakuyo to the Golden Gate, which is in the west. There are some camps in the west of Etosha. That road never used to be accessible, but it now is because there are camps here. There's a campsite called Olifants Rus, which is where they used to hang elephants to dry them when they hunted them. It's a bit of a freaky place to go. I've got a photo of Olifants Rus. There's a nice hide there. But as you travel further west, you kind of start going into the sort of the rocky hillsides of sort of northwestern Namibia. And you get a whole sort of different suite of bird species and animals. Hartman's mountain zebra is the one I mentioned. You get an endemic squirrel. And so it's a different feel to it. It's not like the open plains of the main part of Etosha. This Ruppel's parrot, I'll speak a little bit more about Ruppel's parrot in a second, but this was photographed at Hobbit. So this is the route you take. You leave Okakuyo and you travel on this road that exits the Galton Gate over here, which is not that memorable. It's a very small gate with a few flags. And then Hobbitier Lodge it looks like it's very close, but this sort of 15 kilometers of road is very rocky, and it takes a good hour to travel, but it's definitely well worth it. So this is Olifantsrus over here. There's this very, very elaborate hike. We're not quite sure. I suspect there was some government contract that was awarded to somebody's cousin, because there is a very elaborate hide that probably sees 5 visitors a day, even in peak season. But we walked to the hide and we looked out and we appreciated it, but they could have spent the money certainly elsewhere in the more sort of populated sections of the park. This is the wonderful fire pit at Hobbitier Lodge. It's got an amazing deck. It looks out onto a nice waterhole. We had lion and elephant just walking in front of this electric fence here. And at night it was amazing. You could hear all the sounds. The only downside at Hobbitier is they have got lion. It's a place that I would absolutely love to just walk, because the endemic birding there is really good, but unfortunately you can't. So everything's got to be vehicle based, but it still is an amazing place. So just some of the birds. Purple roller is not a particularly special bird, but posed very nicely. Bare-cheeked babblers are ubiquitous. They're pretty much everywhere, and it's really nice to get photographic opportunities of a really special bird. And then this is the red-billed hornbill conundrum. So this bird on the left and the bird on the right were photographed within sort of a few hundred meters of each other. So there's a real sort of, just like the wood hoopoes, there's a taxonomy issue with these red-billed hornbills. There's a very clear hybrid zone. So the features of a Damara hornbill are a white cheek, this white cheek over here, and a brown eye. And there are a few other small differences, but the white cheek is very important to see. And the brown eye is very important as well. You can see this bird has got a very clear brown eye, and I'll show you a picture of a red-billed hornbill in a sec, and you'll understand what I'm talking about. But this definitely is not a white cheek. And so this bird here, I'm pretty sure, is a southern red-billed, Damara red-billed hornbill hybrid, whereas this bird was probably the only one we saw at Hobbitier, which is very well known for red-billed hornbills, Damara red-billed hornbills. This was the only, I suspect, pure Damara bird that we saw. And most of the birds we saw were like this. And you can see this next slide. This was a different bird, and you can see this one is even more dark-eared than the other one, very brown eye. And if you compare that to the southern red-billed hornbill, this one was photographed near Pretoria. So you can see the very pale eye and the dark cheek. So it really is very difficult to say. If you want to tick Damara red-billed hornbill in that part of Namibia, make sure you find one that has a white cheek. I suspect you will, but there's a real problem with the taxonomy of these red-billed hornbills. And it's not only in Namibia. Red-billed hornbills throughout Africa have got lots of hybrid zones, and there are plenty of them, but it's quite tricky to tell where one starts and where one ends and where the other one starts. So anyway, probably the most special bird we saw at Hobbitier were these wonderful hot-lobed spurfowl. So you get them in these pairs. You don't get them in large groups. They're generally found in pairs, and you can see that this is a photo of the habitat, these large trees and in these rocky hillsides. They're incredibly noisy early in the morning. So we heard this pair calling, and then they got flushed from the car and then ran onto these rocks and posed very, very nicely. They're just such special birds, endemic to obviously Namibia and Angola. Incidentally, the only endemic bird to Namibia is June lark. But then you get all these northern Namibia endemics, which then go into Angola. So they're not single country endemics, but they're pretty much endemic for our purposes as Southern African birders. And this male has got this enormous, male and female have got this enormous bill, but very easy to identify. The male and female are very sexually dimorphic, which is nice. Anyway, Ruppel's parrot, there was a seeping tap, and you can see this tap over here. That photo I showed, the title slide, was the same pair. There was a pair of birds coming to drink at this leaking tap or leaking pipe. Adam and I sat on this lovely piece of wood, and we just waited for him to come down and drink so we could get some photographs. And Ruppel's parrot is one of those very, very tricky endemics. I think if you know where there are fruiting trees, that they feed on the fruits. So at Iaba, there was a fruiting syringa tree, and they were visiting that syringa tree sort of infrequently. We didn't see them at Iaba. But they're quite hard to pin down. So don't go to Namibia expecting that Rupel's parrot will be easy. They occur in that sort of north central western area, but they can be very, very difficult to pin down. We were lucky we had this particular pair that were very regularly coming down to this leaking pipe, and then they'd flush into the tree, and then they'd sit nicely in those sort of mapani trees, which was great for photographic opportunities. So we traveled then from Hobbitier, and we had 2 wonderful nights there. And then we traveled south to Aiba. This is the title slide, and you can see the bungalows at Aiba, set against these rocky granite inselbergs overlooking the plains. And I'll show you some more photos of that in a sec. But this is just the route you travel. This is a wonderful road, but once again, it's a road that has very little traffic, and you don't want to have a puncture, which is what happened to us. So the Rippon's car had an unfortunate puncture. Luckily, we had a guy who stopped and helped us change the tire. He obviously recognized that Alistair and I were not manly enough to do it ourselves, but it was nice to have some assistance. So we punctured just between Fransfontein and Corichis, and it meant we had to then detour into Corichis and get the tire fixed, because you can't travel on those roads without a spare tire. So we stopped, and while they fixed the tire, we played some dice game in the garage, and it was the quirkiest. That's the thing about Namibia, is you find these amazingly quirky little spots where people are eking out a decent living. So this guy was, someone who supplied tires, and I suspect he had quite a decent throughput, because punctures do happen on those roads. Just very interestingly, this cheetah was the only cheetah we saw in Namibia, and it was pretty exciting, is because we had left Etosha, we left Hobbitier, and we were on the main road going south to Corichis. And when Jean from the back of the car spotted it, we screeched to a halt, did a U-turn, and went back and had a look. And we were very delighted to add cheetah to our list. It was a lifer for, I think, Adam. I think Jean and Tommy had seen one before, but Adam was delighted to add cheetah to his mammal list. I just included this sort of Google image. This is the Orongo sort of caldera. It's basically a volcanic extrusion of rocks. And Aiba is situated over here, just north of the caldera, but there are lots of these rocky areas that you can see, and you can see the plains over here. And this is the rocky region where Namibian endemic birds are most commonly seen. And certainly if you want to see the really special endemics, Aiba is an absolutely amazing place to go. So this is the dining room, and they would light this fire every evening and serve us drinks here. They had a wonderful little water hole here where birds came down to drink during the day. These rocks, every evening as it got dark, there were plenty of freckled nightjars calling from these rocks, and we even got some photographic opportunities of them. And you do sundowners on top of these rocks. It's really a special place. So pale-winged starlings, they were very common. White-throated canary, we saw plenty of those as well. And then the green-winged partilia. So those were the birds that came to drink, and not necessarily the particularly special birds. To get to see the special birds, you need to walk through these granite rocks. So Adam and I we were there 2 nights, and we would go each morning, and we would walk along the base of the rocks and just listen for the birds. And we were seeing heartlobe spurfowl amongst these boulders. You're getting carps, tits, Montero's hornbills, white-tailed shrikes, and rock runner. And rock runner, I guess, is probably the most special bird. But the white-tailed shrikes, they're common, but you can miss them if you don't go to the right places. And they just are such amazing birds. They've got such attitude, and they really are. It's like a ground batis, I guess is the best way to describe them. Short little tails, and when they fly, they've got these real fluttering wings, and you just see all the blacks and whites and greys as they fly away from you. So then we had, just on that walk, Layard's warblers, pretty common, yellow-bellied yarramamla. We had good views of rock runner, not the best views, so not a great photo. Mountain wheatears are common on those rocky areas. Booted eagles love those granite inselbergs. And then carp's tits, not a great photo of carp's tits. Carp's tits are not that common, but we found them. There was a particular pair just behind the lodge at Aiba, and it's a bird that can be tricky, a little bit like the parrots. They can be hard to find. but their call is very recognizable and they're quite easy to pin down once you hear the call. So the thing is, we have a plan to go to Swakop, and the classic thing to do is to go from Iba down to Swakop via Spitskop. But we had been to Spitskop on previous occasions and we'd always missed Herrera Chat. I'd seen Herrera Chat sort of 20 years ago on a trip to Namibia, and unfortunately Adam had never seen one. And Adam being my true birding son, we had a conversation and we said to the family, who wants to come down for a few hours to Spitskop, and you can see the route to get there. It's only about an hour's drive to get to Spitskop. And Spitskop is really a place that's worth visiting. So even if you don't go down to Swakop and you're in the Rongo area, it's worth the drive because it just is quite spectacular. And this photo doesn't do it justice because you can't see the scale here. I've got a photo of the car next to one of these rocks in a sec. But this particular boulder over here, you think is a small boulder, but it's probably sort of 10 stories high. So it's an amazingly beautiful place from a scenic point of view. And it, of course, has got the most reliable spots for Herrera Chat, which is a very, very difficult endemic bird of Namibia. So we went there looking for Herrera Chat, and I'd been there many times trying to find them myself. But this time I used a little bit of cunning. So I went into the reception area and I asked the lady at the reception if there's anyone who can help us with Herrera Chat. She said, of course, the guides who show the rock paintings, they know where the Herrera Chats were. So we jumped in the car. There's a little spot where they wait for tourists to ask them to guide them for the rock paintings. And I think what's happened is they're getting a lot more visitors that are looking for Herrera Chat than are wanting to see the paintings. So this group of 4 or 5 guides has learned how to find them. They've learned how to whistle for them. They've learned where their regular haunts are. And so we acquired the services of Dennis. So Dennis was incredibly quirky, and I don't know if you know this particular hand signal. This is the hand signal that he used to represent Namibia. So you can see the Caprivi was his thumb, and then obviously the length of Namibia. So it was important that he posed like that for the photograph. So he had his fellies, his sort of long socks, his green rimmed mirror sunglasses, and his trucker hat. And he was going to show us a Herrera Chat. And I was skeptical because he didn't seem to be a great birder, but he was learning fast and realizing that definitely was some money to be made. And in fact, he found us a Herrera Chat relatively easily. Unfortunately, not a great photograph. They were pretty skittish, but it's such a special bird, and I had to share the photo of it. And it happened to be Adam's 750th Southern African bird. So we took a celebratory photograph of that. We actually were a bit wary of Dennis having COVID. He was coughing quite a lot, and we actually spoke to him. And it's interesting, in those areas, the locals are not that concerned about COVID. Well, they weren't certainly last year. So I think he said, no, we're tough here in Namibia and we can beat it. He did say that people do get sick, but it didn't seem to be too big of a problem. But I did say to Adam, keep your distance from Dennis, or if you get close to him, use your mask. But the irony was that we were probably the ones with COVID at the time, and not Dennis. So anyway, that was a very successful trip to Spitskop, and it was well worth doing. We had great views of some Temminck's courses on the way there. The scenery is spectacular, and you can see just the scale. So if you look in this photo on the right, the scale of those rocks, and that's the combi we traveled in. And it's a very well-known place for mountain climbers. They climb those rock faces, and you get these wonderful Montero's hornbills. To me, is probably our most handsome Southern African hornbill. This guy had lost the top of his bill. It didn't seem to affect him too much. He was feeding at one of the picnic sites, and very tame actually. And we got some nice photographs of this particular bird. And once again, another endemic of Namibia. So what Irongo is, I think, should be world famous for is sunset opportunities. Here's Emma playing some games with the sun. And we loved the 2 evenings we went up there to head up there and enjoy the sunset with a beer, tafel beer, overlooking the plains of Namibia at the base of the caldera. And it's quite interesting because we were in the Irongo area 2015, so 6 years previously. On the 2nd of July 2015, I took this photograph of my 4 kids. There's Jack, Tommy, Emma, and Adam. And this was actually a Aronga Wilderness Lodge, but the sunset opportunities are pretty much the same. So we decided, as one does, to recreate the photo. And you can see we we tried to get them to pose in similar poses. Being a lot bigger, it was not as easy to sit as they did. But there's Jack, Tommy, Emma, and Adam 6 years later. So it was quite a fun thing to do, and just to see how they've grown over the trips that we've done to Namibia. So anyway, I think if I had to summarize, sorry, I know I'm almost up an hour, but to summarize, IBA, it was very reasonably priced. I think they obviously struggled through COVID, so we got a very nice deal. The food was outstanding. There's a wonderful guy who takes you on the walks, and he knows the birds, so he will be able to show you the birds. So Aronga Wilderness Lodge used to be a very popular spot for birders to go to. They lost their lease during COVID. They weren't able to afford the lease, and so they actually moved to this IBA site, and so they're running IBA. And it's not far from Windhoek. It's like 3 hours. It's not even 3 hours drive from Windhoek. So even if you really want to spoil yourselves, you can fly into Windhoek and you can spend a 3-night-long weekend at IBA. You can get a direct flight from Cape Town to Windhoek. The 3-hour drive, you rent a car. You don't really need a car. You don't need a 4x4. You can drive to Spitzkop in a normal sedan, and to just spoil yourself in a place that's just got such amazing solitude. So I would highly recommend going to IBA, and that was a good way to summarize the experience we had there. It definitely was our favorite place, and we absolutely loved it, and we will definitely go back. So then we barreled down to Windhoek to spend our last night. And the only reason we spent our last night in the Crummy Motel is because we had to go for our COVID test. So they have these COVID testing stations, much like we do in Cape Town. As you can see, it's about a 3-hour drive, and we got to the shopping mall where you drive into the parking garage, and we had our COVID test. And at this stage, Tommy had a few headaches. Jeannie had lost her taste and smell, and Adam and Jack had got a little bit of a snotty nose. I felt fine throughout, and so when we approached Windhoek, we were talking about what are the eventualities if one of the kids test positive, what if one of the adults test positive, because obviously you can't get onto an airplane with a positive COVID test. And I stopped the conversation. I said, well, let's just wait and see what happens. See if we get a positive test, and then we can decide from there. So all of this stuff racing through our minds. We had the test at about 1 o'clock on the Friday. We went and spoiled the kids to a Steers burger, and then we went to our Crummy Motel, and we got our test results at 6 o'clock the next morning. I woke up and I quickly went onto the Wi-Fi and I scrolled through my emails, and it took forever to open. And I went through each of the test results, and every single one came up quite bizarrely as negative, and so we were away to go. And the same thing happened with the RIP. And so we really can't explain how we had basically 20 negative COVID tests, where we are pretty confident that we traveled in Namibia with COVID. We did so very carefully with masks and isolating from people, which is quite easy to do in most parts of Namibia. But we were so fortunate to have a 2-week undisturbed holiday in Namibia without having any COVID dramas that we needed to worry about. So we were at the Crummy Motel, and as you can see, after being 2 weeks on the road in amazing open spaces, people will return. They call it reverting to the mean, which in this instance is the 2 girls watching a chick flick that's Cursed on the right and Emma on the left, and the 4 boys straight on their phones checking in with their Instagram and TikTok. And I basically kicked them out of the hotel rooms, and I said, no, we've got to go do stuff. So we took a visit, and we went to what's called the Independence Museum, which is next to the Christ Church, pretty much in the middle of Windhoek. So this is the Christ Church. This is Sam and Joma, I think. And here is the Independence Museum, and there's a wonderful bar at the top, on the top floor, I think on this level over here, where you can see in all directions. And we went up there for a drink. And the kids had a race up and down the steps of the building, obviously to get rid of some energy. But it was a nice way to spend our last evening in Windhoek, and we had a wonderful meal at one of the restaurants. So that's the 4 kids up at the bar. And then the next morning we went to Avis Dam, and if you're in Windhoek for any reason, work or traveling or holiday, I would strongly recommend going to Avis Dam. There's a wonderful, this is the dam wall, which is where the kids are. If you walk around, you can do a walk around the full perimeter of the nature reserve. And the birding is, this is where the red-throated pipit was, if anyone twitched that, it was on these mud banks. But there are rock runners over here. There are just the Montero's hornbills everywhere. There's ashy tits. It's a really good place. Bradfield swifts fly around the dam. So it's a wonderful place to get some last-minute birding, or it's a very good introduction to Namibian birding if you are spending your first night in Windhoek. So here's some of the birds that we photographed: a lovely ground scraper thrush, and then black-faced waxbill, plenty of those. Different form of mountain wheatear, and this non-melanistic gay-barred goshawk was extremely obliging. And then this was Adam's last lifer of the trip, ashy tit, which was interestingly quite a difficult bird to get on our Namibian trip, and eventually got it at Avis Dam. And then probably the highlight photographically for me of that section of the trip was this rock runner. The ones at Iba had been quite skittish, but these birds are obviously very used to people because it's a very busy recreational spot on the dam. And so this particular rock runner was incredibly obliging, and just really nice to get some very nice photos of a very, very special endemic bird. So that brings me to a close. I'm sorry it went on maybe a bit longer than the 45 or 50 minutes I was hoping it would take, and apologies for some of the technical glitches at the beginning, but we managed to get through it mostly unscathed. Yeah, and so thank you very much for listening. It's weird to be talking to a screen. I suppose I should be getting used to it by now. I see there's some comments coming through. I'd love people to send through some questions if you want. So what I'll just do is I'll read through some of the questions. I see you never had an off-road vehicle. I thought that traveling through Namibia, that a 4x4 is a must. You definitely don't need a 4x4 in most parts of Namibia. So if you want to do some of the adventurous stuff, if you want to go up to the sort of the Kunene, you'll need a 4x4, particularly in the wet season. And the wet season is also much more difficult in most parts of Namibia, particularly in the northern sections. We were in a caravel, and the Rippins were in a sort of Renault Duster. We had absolutely no problems in the caravel. The roads, the gravel roads are the best gravel roads in the world. There are some places where it maybe is a little bit corrugated and bumpy, but even if you want to access places like Sossusvlei, the roads down to Sossusvlei are absolutely fine. We've done Namibia, I think 4 or 5 times, and we did it once with driving from Cape Town, where I had my sort of Prado, but you can definitely do Namibia in a sedan, and you can do it very comfortably. So don't be frightened by the roads. Hope that answers that question. And then if there are any more, I see someone saying they're feeling homesick, so obviously from Namibia. I wonder if anyone has any more questions. Feel free to either pop them in the chat room, or you can even unmute yourself if you want and ask a live question. Otherwise, I'll just give it a second or two.
Hi, Mike. I hope you can hear me.
Yes, I can.
Fantastic photographs. Just a very boring techie question. What kit do you have? Because I don't achieve that quality of stuff. I mean, yeah. What do you have? You're obviously very good, which I'm not. But what kit do you have?
So I have got. So the camera I used on that trip was a Canon 1DX Mark II, and my lens is a 500 f4 lens. So it is good equipment. Adam uses a 7D Mark II and a 100-400 f5.6, and he gets some very good results with that as well. I have just, so I won't go into a whole technical thing, but I have also just converted to a mirrorless body, so the R6, and I'm finding the results with that, with the adapter on the 500 f4 is very good as well. But I will say that Namibia is the best country in the world for bird photography, because you get such good light, particularly in winter. And so the photographs I took, yes, there are some good ones, but I can assure you I take plenty of really terrible photograph.
I mean, that last rock jumper was an astonishing photograph.
Thank you.
The one at the dam. Yeah. Wow.
This one over here. Yeah. Thank you very much. I was excited to get that because it's not an easy bird to photograph, particularly given its habitat preference in the rocky jumbles. You got to sort of walk up into the hillsides, but this one was quite obliging.
Okay, so interesting. 500. I mean, I've got a 400, and I've actually given up.
No, don't give up.
Photographing birds with that, that's fantastic for animals, but
yeah,
I don't get what you get. But anyway, great,
well,
great. Thanks very much.
It
was very interesting.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that.
Hello, if I can come in here, Mike.
Yes, hi, it's Bridget. Hi, Bridget.
It's Bridget from the Tygerberg Bird Club. I just want to say a very big thank you to yourself and Priscilla for having the joint meeting. And quite a few of our members couldn't link on. Priscilla has promised that we can share the link again on Monday. I just want to say what a fantastic family holiday that you've had. I think road trips are very special, especially before kids leave to go to varsity. I did this similar trips with my family, but mainly animal orientated and with non-birders, and in the 80s and 90s, and still remember them very well to this day. Thank you very much for sharing wonderful pictures. You're a great photographer, and it's great that you know all the mammals that you saw. Gee whiz, I didn't think that there were that many mammals. It's fantastic, your total. We're very glad that you all tested negative, otherwise you might have been sitting up there for a while, which I believe is horrendous.
Yeah, we were very pleased to test negative as well.
I think they just sign everybody out and happy to get rid of you,
Yeah, I think that is a bit of a case as well.
Well, thank you very much for sharing your wonderful, wonderful holiday, and very special for your kids and family. And on behalf of the Tygerberg Bird Club, as well as the Cape Bird Club, thank you very, very much. It's been a wonderful talk.
Thanks very much, Bridget. I'll just finish off and say, yes, it's really nice to be able to share these things. I love presenting, and yeah, I am very grateful that my kids and Jean enjoy these road trips. It gives me a great opportunity to see some good birds. So watch this space. We've got a June-July holiday coming up this year, and I'm sure we'll be doing something exciting. So we certainly look forward to that. And yeah, thanks very much for everyone's attendance. And I do apologize for some of the technical glitches. My PowerPoint crashed and caused a little bit of a stress, but I'm pleased we got it going.